Here we go. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me on another of my interview series. Today I'm going to be talking to David Adelman, who is an author and educator. He's otherwise known as the People's Lawyer. We're going to be looking at a little bit about law. David, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Total pleasure to be here.
It's so nice to talk to you because I was reading in a book that we've been talking to the authors Gloria Moss and Catherine Armitage recently, in this book called Lightbulb Moments and the Power of Critical Thinking. And there's a piece about you which I believe you probably wrote and submitted to the book. And it talks about you as the people's lawyer, educating people in, well, you're going to correct me, I know this. I thought you were educating people in common law and how to get out of difficult situations that might arise. So it's possible that I often make mistakes, so I put my hand up to that. But I thought you'd be an interesting person to talk to because we've been talking about constitution, we've been talking about natural law, God's law, common law, those sort of things. And you, I think, are a lawyer. But you don't so much give advice, but you educate people on different aspects of law. Is that right?
It is right, but it's law that I've basically self-educated myself on, because my original training, which was in the law as the system presents it, which is not true law, didn't really give me much grounding in how to protect people really from tyrannical systems.
Right.
So since, in particular, the CV19 issue, I don't know how much you want to allow me to name it by name, but let's call it the CV19 issue. There's been a massive upsurge in interest in freedom, all things freedom and all things protection against tyranny. I had been studying the law for some time before CV19, and basically when it happened, there was a call from my friends and associates to say, David, you need to put your knowledge into action, get out on the streets and evolve your course, because I was already giving a course. It started out as a come to my house course, and then it evolved into a Zoom call course. And it's designed to help people really clear their heads on who they are, because the system has made our heads really fuzzy and taken away all our sense of self and who we are. So it's not so much that I teach the common law, because the common law, as has been handed down to us, is in suspension until further notice, until we the people reassert it. You can only assert it by not engaging with the system. So you'd be asserting, in effect, common sense, the knowledge of who you are, and keeping just out of range of the tentacles of the beast. Yes. That's the secret. And I have a job on my hands because people have been trained in their schooling. And I did watch your schooling, your education show yesterday. Found it fascinating, because I have a current talk about that. Because although I am the people's lawyer, I started out before CV19 as the people's educator, which is where I came into that book that you've just mentioned,
right,
on critical thinking, because although they put me in the law section, they could equally have put me in the education section. It is all about re-educating and, above all, unlearning all the lies, and virtually everything we've ever been told by anyone is false.
Yes, this is a huge thing to comprehend, because when you believe the image of the world that you've created over time, it's very difficult to suddenly say, actually, all of that is just theatre. How do you approach turning what is real into reality when there must be a lot of prejudice and a lot of pushback from people who are going, no, you know, I know that this must be the situation because I've lived it and been in it, and you know, it is what it is?
Well, Larkin Rose, the the presenter in America divides people up into statists and voluntarists. Some people are born with a propensity to trust their government, their nanny state, their teachers, their doctors, their lawyers, their dentists, etc., etc. That's the vast majority. And the beauty of I nearly said the word entire. CV19.
It's all right, yeah.
Yeah, the beauty of that is that it awakened many people to the fact that perhaps statism is not the best way to go. Now, I had a privileged upbringing in the sense that I always had a skepticism of all things state-run, all things institutional. And it wasn't that I knew anything that nobody else did. It was just more of a hunch. And then it led me to leave the legal profession very early. I was still only in my mid-20s, and go on a journey of self-definition. So I've been defining my own life for a very, very, very long time. So when it came to responding to CV19 and living a life which had no restrictions on it, it was easy for me because I've been living my own life for so long. I didn't have anyone breathing down my neck, threatening to divorce me or evict me or do anything untoward that would put me off, that would coerce me back into my place as a good little slave. Now, alluding to something that you just said, it's for some people who have taken on marriage, children, mortgage, cars, career, it's not so easy. And we have to be a little bit more patient and understanding with people like those, because they are walking through treacle. And, the best we can do is say, all right, stop what you're doing. Don't walk any further. Don't go backwards. Just stand still and have a think.
I mean, one of the things that I found, somebody said to me very early on, he said, just entertain some of the ideas that you're going to discover. Don't put your ego in that shuts it down. Just entertain them, let them stay there, so that you're not saying yes or no, but you're just able to think about things which often go against what you know or have believed all your life. And then you start to let that percolate in as you start to make a judgment. Well, actually, is that true or is that not true? Or how do I feel about it, without shutting down an argument straight away? I found that a very useful technique, to just say, okay, I'm just going to entertain it. I'm just going to accept that that is a potential thing. I'm not going to say yes or no. So that worked for me. Now, have you been, I mean, I'm self-employed, and I've been self-employed pretty much all my life. So when you talk about people with who are married and they're in jobs and things like that, you're taking on a lot of other people's philosophy as well as yourself. Whereas I've been pretty much independent and able to go, actually, do you know what? I just don't, I don't get involved with the state. So take us through perhaps an approach that you would to somebody who is coming to you in some state, and you're trying to educate them. What are we? Where do we start with this?
Well, I use the power of the question. I used to use the power of the exclamation, and then I soon realized that just doesn't work. It just raises their heckles, their defenses, and creates barriers and obstacles. Because I don't have that deferential tone of voice that would make people think that how can I put it? It's kind of, sometimes there's a tone of sarcasm in me that just rears its ugly head, and I find I get people's backs up. So what I do is I ask relevant questions, and in particular, now that I'm doing talks, and I have been doing for some time, I give people, my audience, who are either awake or waking up, a sample of questions that I would ask given the opportunity. Now, there are so many people who are so close-minded, mainly because they've been to school where their minds were shut down, their brains were closed off to all things mystical and all things quantum and all things full of human potential, that people's minds are so closed down that it's actually not very likely that someone's going to come to me anymore, or to you, and say, I'm really confused, please help. In fact, I don't remember the last time it happened, to be quite honest. So all you can do is put information out there on your social media, drop the odd leaflet in places. And I remember 3 years ago, me and a graphic artist created a CV19 questionnaire, and it was it had lovely sort of teenage visuals. It was done like a sort of allegory, you know, with some of the imagery was reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. Some of it was, you know, it was very pictorial. So you have to make people keep them relaxed, entertain them as you, that's the word you used, and use above all the question and humor. So what I've tried to do in the last year or two is outgrow my sarcasm, which is based in, I can't believe that they don't know this, or that they don't even want to know this, and use irony rather than sarcasm, and therefore don't alienate them, don't make them think that I'm a potential enemy. It's still hard work, because when someone is shut down and you start talking what I would simply call common sense, you can see it's like they go, it's that their eyes glaze over, they look down at the ground, and you can tell that they cannot wait for you to either A, shut up, or B, walk away.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
And I think you're absolutely right there, because I've noticed if I'm talking to somebody about something that I've found out about, and I feel passionate about sharing because I think it's for the good of the nation sort of thing, and I'm talking to one, you get that feeling that, oh, I'm now saying something which is almost beyond their ability to accept, and I need to stop, because it would be too easy to keep adding and adding to try and convince them. But actually, if I do that, they've shut down even further. Whereas a question, and this is why my channel started to get busy with viewers, because I was saying, why is it the government are doing this? And why would they, if they're there for us, be doing this? And I would just let the audience answer the questions. And of course, that was actually educating me at the same time. So it was a very useful tool. You mentioned common sense. Can you explain what you mean by, because before we recorded, I said to you, can we talk about common law? And you said to me, well, I don't call it common law, I call it common sense. So could you explain a bit about what you mean by common sense? What is the common sense that you would say that is what you live by?
Well, let me give you a recent example of, I think the guy's name is Matt Walsh, and he's a documentary maker in the States. Oh, yeah. And he went to one of the African countries because there is a current woke conundrum about the identity of being able to define what a woman is. And he went to, I can't remember, I won't say which country it is because I honestly can't remember it, but he was interviewing the locals there, the natives to that country, and he was asking them what they, how they would define a woman. And they looked at him as if he was absolutely insane. Mm. And they simply said to him, well, if you don't know what a woman is, we can't really take you very seriously. And this is a classic example that Western society has lost the plot when it comes to common sense. And we shouldn't really even need to be having these conversations about what a woman is, because common sense would tell us. We shouldn't need to be wearing masks because common sense would tell us that that's only for someone who's working on a building site that doesn't want to inhale dust. We shouldn't be taking jabs because we don't know what's in them. So we don't even need to know what's in them. All we need to know is that we don't know what's in them. So why would we put something in our blood when we don't know what the contents of the injection are? So these are little common sense tips, tricks, and hacks, which are based in primordial survival need and primordial knowing, which which runs through our heart, basically, and both parts of our brain. But at school, they ignore, I say in my talks that they essentially ignore the four main brains, which is head, left brain, head, right brain, heart brain, and gut brain. And 3 out of those 4 brains are completely neglected, and only one tiny part of the left brain in the head is used. So common sense comes from the judicious use of all those 4 brains. And schooling is deactivating the use of those brains. A question that I would ask to highlight the lack of common sense in current thinking is something, again, I feature in my talk, is about carbon dioxide. And I simply ask, is carbon dioxide a pollutant, or is it a nutrient, a life-giving nutrient? Now, all you need is a little, you don't need to be a scientist. You just need a little modicum of common sense to know that it's the gas of life.
Yeah.
No carbon, no life, no humanity.
What's interesting,
this is what I mean by common sense.
Yes, and you start to wonder whether the sense that you say is it actually common anymore, common amongst us all, or whether these days it's a few people that seem to have this sense. It's almost now as if it's a rare thing. And on the gas of life business, I mean, if ever I do any talks about global warming and I mention not H2O, carbon dioxide, and I say it's the gas of life, and exactly along the lines of, is it a pollutant? And people will say, but water, if you have too much water, you'll drown. If you drink too much water, it's not good for you. It's about the degree, about how much you have. And so they start to muddy the water, so to speak, by bringing in other things. And you're saying, but is it a bad thing, full stop, or is it a good thing? Why do they pump CO2 into greenhouses so that they can grow tomatoes and other plants like that? Without it, they would not be as prosperous as they were, and we wouldn't have the crops that we have.
When someone responds to our common sense with a spurious piece of nonsense, what they are doing is actually gaslighting us. And it features hugely in my current talks, because I don't want to, well, spoiler alert, folks, but the N word, narcissism, features very highly in my current talk, which is called From Globalist Control to Sovereign Freedom, which I'm going all around the country doing. And this is what happens when you talk to a narcissist. They will not allow you to win any perceived debate. They must have the last word, and they do feel better when you walk away feeling frustrated or thwarted in some way. So it's not an even playing field. We think that we're talking to people who are as very much as reasonable and as intelligent as we are, and very often that is just not the case. They may be as intelligent, but they are rarely as reasonable.
Yes, well, I can go along with that. You mentioned there from the globalist to sovereign freedom. Can you explain what you mean by sovereign freedom? I think we all know what globalists are and what they're trying to do, and people are sort of are beginning to understand that. It's the fact that there might be a way out of it, and what it actually might look like. Well,
in my talk, I describe the essential difference between a sovereign and a slave. And I boil it down to slaves need permission while sovereigns do not. So if you feel that you need permission to do anything like watch TV, and in the world of commerce, permission is referred to as a license. If you feel that you need a license to drive, a license to watch TV, a license to do anything, a license to fish, whatever, then you have abdicated responsibility for your own life. You have surrendered sovereignty on that issue to an institution or a perceived higher authority, and you have, in effect, let yourself and the side down. And the side, of course, is sovereign humanity. And what this current period in history is going to allow us to do is to recover that sovereignty, initially as individuals, and then eventually as a collective. And when we realize that we don't need permission. For example, when you go to school, they are now teaching, and I think this came up in your talk yesterday, so I'm just reiterating what the young lady said, that you cannot say no and you cannot ask why.
Yeah, I mean, that's just absolutely awful.
So this requires an immense pushback, because if you cannot say no and you cannot ask why, then who are you? You're certainly not a sovereign. So if you're not a sovereign, there's no fence to sit on, you're a slave. It's one or the other.
And as a young person who has no experience and is growing up, and you're thrust into an institution that you've never asked to go, and you're being taught things you've never entered your head about, and you're suddenly being told this is how you've got to behave, you can't say no, you've got to obey, and it's as overt as that, it's very difficult for somebody who has no experience of life to push back against that. And if parents are ignorant of that as well, then there's no intervention. And as a parent, you're the guardian of your child and should be educating your child enough so that once they're of a certain age, that they can stand on their own and push back against people who are being overtly authoritarian to them. And that I think when we exposed that in the video yesterday, in the interview yesterday, I think that's had a huge effect on people thinking, bloody hell, that's not right. And clearly it isn't. But that asking for permission that we've indoctrinated our kids, and to an extent, a lot of us are like that, and we saw that during lockdown. How do you push back when it appears the full force of government and its authority, the police and all the sort of people in authority, doctors and mainstream media, are pushing out this one very solid message? You must, for example, in that case, take a jab, or you must stay inside, you must obey our law. How do you push back against that?
Okay, well, I'm going to give two answers to that question. It may turn into three, and I'm going to pull something out of the hat that is relevant, again, to your conversation on education that you had yesterday.
Thank you.
So the first thing I would say that you do to push back is to be yourself. And I'm going to give a very specific example of how I was myself at a certain key moment in time back in the so-called lockdown. I was giving a little speech, and it was a very little speech because I had an audience of about 3 or 4. And I was in Macclesfield in Cheshire, that I describe as arguably the nation's most evil town. And I hope they're watching, because I want them to know that if they don't already. Now, why do I describe Macclesfield as the nation's most evil town? Well, I had rocked up with my little PA and a few friends, and I was giving them a little talk about the truth behind CV19, and in fact, that no one has ever isolated a virus. There's nothing to fear but fear itself, etc., etc. I had the day in question was known as Treacle Market Day, and nothing to do with treacle. It's just an ancient story about a horse that drops a cargo of treacle, and it turns out that that's the site that they have the market on. And so there was about 6 stall holders, because it was lockdown, social distancing, and normally there's about 60 or 30. And there was hardly any customers because people were still frightened of going outside. And I rock up, and it's almost like a ghost town, and I start saying what I'm saying. And 1 or 2 of the stall holders come over to me and say, "You can't say that. You're killing our business." I said, "I beg your pardon." I said, "This is lockdown. You haven't got any business. I'm just here to give you a way out." And anyway, long story short, I had passers-by trying to pull out the cords from my PA system, and I had one particular stall holder come up to me, face up to me, take a close-up picture and says, next time you're in Macclesfield, I'll be waiting for you. So amid all this aggressive, passive-aggressive, actually not that passive at all, nonsense, I then had a gaggle of officious, yellow-vested, high-vis vested council workers who came up to me and says, do you have a license to emit amplified sound? And obviously I didn't. So we're back to license and permission. I just said to them, no, I don't have a license, but I'm just speaking using a microphone and a speaker. But if you think that that's a legal problem, then I suggest you contact your legal department, who can then contact my legal department, and we can thrash this out using paperwork. In other words, that was my polite way of saying, you can piss right off.
Bog off.
I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't need your permission. Thank you. Now, we were in daylight hours, so nobody could argue that I was creating a public nuisance. And I was prepared to lower the volume just in case someone came out from a house saying, I'm a shift worker, I'm trying to sleep, could you lower the volume? And I would have done.
Yes.
And that's back to common sense. So that was me basically being the change that I wish to see. So in other words, in answer to your question, step one, be that sovereign who does not need permission. And I was just going to interrupt there just to say, did they leave you alone at that point? Of course, because they had no choice.
Right.
I gave them no choice because I challenged their fake authority. Their authority going back to school is simply based on our fear, trepidation, and ignorance. And that segues beautifully onto the second point that I want to make, is that I have devised a remedy to take into schools. Now, there's all kinds of remedy for different situations, but I just want to focus on schools because that's where my heart is.
Right.
And the remedy that people can take into schools comes in 3 parts, and it's encapsulated on a card known as the school protection card. Because I'm thinking that, okay, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years endeavoring to empower adults, and I feel like sometimes I'm flogging a dead horse because either they're going to be empowered anyway, in which case they don't really need my help, or they're too statist and too locked into the system, and it's just, I'm getting nowhere fast. And then I thought, well, hang on, why don't I turn my attention, which was originally my focus when I was more like the people's educator, an author of a book called School No Place for Children, which is mentioned in the book that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And why don't I amalgamate these two worlds, bring them together, see what I can come up with? And what I did come up with was something called the school protection card. Right, how does this work? You give the card to the boy or girl, and you say to the boy or girl, they would have to be at least late primary, so age 10 probably, and say to the boy or girl, now then, I would like to take you out of school, but mummy or daddy is objecting, or I'm the only mummy or dad you have or caregiver, and I have to work, and so we have to keep sending you to school. We don't want to, but we have to for now. Because let's face it, the common sense remedy is just to deregister the boy or girl, and that's the end of that. So you give them a card. On the card, it says, if you're given an unreasonable demand, if your teacher wants you to do something that doesn't feel right, teacher or staff member, so let's broaden it out a bit, then ask them if they are giving you an order or simply a request. If they're giving you a request, ask them, tell them that, thank you very much, but it doesn't feel right for me to do that. In other words, you're teaching them self-assertion, self-confidence skills, and command of language. So that's your first, so that's sovereignty for juniors, prototype sovereignty for juniors. If the teacher says, no, it's an order, there's no such thing as no, you got to do as you're told and stop asking questions. Well then, if it's an order, then I have here my invoice, my family invoice for compliance with that order. Obviously, I'm not holding an actual order up or an invoice up, but if people want to know more, they can go on my website and download the materials, the PDF. So that order will say something like, invoice for compliance, fee schedules for compliance, £500 per minute for unlawful restrictions of movement, detentions. So it's substantial. And even if you were grown up and you were put in a police cell without lawful excuse, a former serving officer told me that you could charge £3,000 an hour for false imprisonment, or £1,000 a minute if you're vulnerable. Well, a boy or girl by definition is a vulnerable young.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we are talking about £1,000 a minute. So I've met the system halfway, reduced it to £500 a minute.
Wow.
So that's your first remedy in commerce. And people say, well, what commerce? Why commerce? Well, schools are commercial entities. The management referred to boys and girls as units and as the product. So we are here fighting fire with fire.
Right.
So as you could say, the skeptics will say, David, it hasn't got a chance. The boy or girl won't know what they're doing. The parents will be too nervous, blah, blah, blah. I accept that. So there is backup. There's two backup strategies. And I say to them, here's a backup strategy if your mum and dad haven't given you an invoice, or they don't really fully comprehend what it means to have an invoice. Ask the teacher or staff member if they're giving you a choice. If the answer is yes, then we're back to the self-confidence. Thank you very much, but no, thank you. And if they say no, then we hit them with statutory remedy. It's Modern Slavery Act 2015, Section 3, subsection 5, modern exploitation, criminal exploitation. It is a crime to force or to induce, and on the card I say make, because boys and girls prefer that simple language, I think. Mm-hmm. It's a crime to make or induce, in the statute language of the statute, a person, in this case a boy or girl, to do something against their will using threats or force.
Right.
That's criminal.
Yeah.
Somebody has used that in the freedom movement. Someone's used that to get HMRC off their backs.
Really?
Yeah. So basically, we're using the system. We've had this since 2015, the Modern Slavery Act 2015. Nobody's been using it. Well, it has started now. In the last 12 months, people have started to use it. It's in my course notes. So there'll be an acceleration process. Now, of course, if you're dealing with the proverbial narcissist in school, and the school itself represents narcissism, then they will kick off, because they cannot afford to give you the last word. So it will kick off, it will escalate, in which case we have the ace up our sleeve, which is international law. The 1989 UN Convention on the Rights of the Child say that all discipline in schools, it's Article 28, and it's on the card. Everything that I'm saying now is on this card, the school protection card. Article 28, 1989 United Convention on the Rights of the Child, quote, all discipline in schools should respect human dignity. Now, to my naive ears, that's game, set, and match. What school would want to run the risk of being reported to the local press for being in breach of a United Nations Convention, in effect, on human rights?
Yes. Well, yes. No, I mean, absolutely. Who would? But you can sort of see a situation in which the teacher presented with this by a child would be at first flummoxed. What are you talking about? Look, I want you to go and do whatever it was. And if the child is brave enough to stand it out and say, is that a request or is this an order? And he says, well, of course it's an order. He's like, fine, as you say, it's £500 a minute. I'm happy to do it. It's £500 a minute. Thank you very much. But you can see the teacher would be either dismissing this. How would you then, if the child is then still forced by threats and menaces to go and carry out whatever it is, and he says, well, I did that for an hour, and you go, well, okay, that's £30,000, thanks very much. How would you go ahead and then take that further so that it actually means something, rather than an exercise in who's going to win the argument at that stage.
It may not be necessary to take it further. You've got witnesses in the classroom. So the boy or girl could have make a pre-arrangement with one or two of their classmates, show them the card and show them what they propose to do. You are bound to have support from at least one or two and probably a lot more than one or two. They are already rioting in schools, bless them, and so they should, because they are being deprived of, I think it's safe toilet space and permission to go to the toilet. So I think we need to be, again, apply some common sense and appreciate that boys and girls, I know a lot of boys and girls that will bite my hand off when I give them this card. Just give me that card. I'm in. I'm doing it. I'm on. I'm involved. Count me in. Because we seriously underestimate the evil that is being visited upon the young ones in the classroom. And we seriously underestimate their readiness to push back against it.
What would you say when knowing children being children, that some children are going to be just belligerent and try things on because they, for whatever reason, they're lazy or they just want to say, well, I've got this card, because you hear this, you can't make me do anything. I mean, when I was at school, you had blackboard rubbers being thrown at you or whacked over the knuckles with a ruler, which of course is not happening now. And kids sort of know, you can't hit me, you can't touch me, and all of this, which doesn't help a cohesive, wholesome classroom to try and get through a lesson if you've got kids deliberately making it awkward for the rest of the class, and the teacher is trying to navigate a way to educate as best they can. Can I challenge you on what you've just said? That there was a healthy dose of statism in the tone of what you've just said. Right, okay.
My presumption is at the other end of the spectrum, based on personal experience, research for the book, and the worsening of circumstances that has been taking place in the last few years, the woke agenda, the transsexual agenda, the regenderization, the re-identification of boys and girls. My assumption now is that the classroom, there is no wholesome, cohesive culture in the classroom. It is perverse. It subverts parental authority. It subverts the journey of the boy or girl towards sovereign adulthood, and it needs to be sabotaged, and it needs to be sabotaged quite quickly. Otherwise, we're going to, we're talking about the future of humanity. It doesn't matter whether a boy or girl ultimately passes 7 GCSEs or 10 GCSEs. It doesn't matter ultimately whether they get 2 A's and a C or 2 B's and a D. It does not matter to humanity, but it does matter that they maintain their dignity and integrity and self-respect and all their gifts and talents and all the things that they could contribute to the world if they were just allowed to. And so my remedy is designed to give them some kind of tool or weapon, if you like, because children are being weaponized. So we need a countermeasure because we are at war, and the main coalface, if you like, or the interface between those with malevolent intent and those with benevolent intent is now the classroom itself. Because the older ones, we can look after ourselves to a greater or lesser extent, but to trap boys and girls in a prison cell known as a classroom means that we actually need powerful weaponry. And yes, the odd boy or girl who might turn out to be a narcissist by what you were saying. So there'll always be the odd boy or girl, just as there's always the odd grown-up who decides to have a giggle, have a laugh, and abuses this strategy and abuses this tool. But I'm taking the bigger picture, and I'm looking to protect the boys and girls en masse as a collective. And so if the odd one or two abuses this approach, so be it. But And this is all part of the beauty of being human. We can't cater for all. You can please some of the people some of the time, etc. Yeah.
So this is absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting to get your perspective on this. I mean, the logical conclusion, it seems to me, from what you're saying, is actually kids shouldn't be in school at all.
Correct.
And to a certain degree, I would agree with you that the system of schools that we have at the moment and the way that it has gone to where it is now is completely against children and against humanity, and is training us up to be useful drones down the end, and obedient state soldiers in a way to take orders and get on with it. Yet I still think that the schooling and the teaching or imparting of knowledge is a very laudable thing, with hungry, not hungry as in physically hungry, knowledge hungry children who want to learn a subject with it in a completely different environment. So you're not saying schooling in itself is a bad thing, but the structure that we have, the imprisonment, the whole thing that we seem at the moment is a terrible way of teaching kids anything.
What I would say is that education, like vaccination, should be voluntary. If a boy or girl, if a particular boy or girl has the attitude, I can't learn from you, I will just go out into life and learn as I go along, that should be applauded. And that applies to a lot of people anyway. Mm. What we learn in life, there's a meme in my talk that shows that we learn that much from theory, so that's the textbook. We learn that much from actually, what's the pilot's living life experience. Yeah, so it's 3 or 4 times as much, and we learn that much from making mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, with classroom being a risk-averse environment, they don't allow you to make mistakes, as well as not allowing you to say no or ask why. They don't allow you to make mistakes. And being a sterile environment in which nothing ever changes and nothing ever happens, how can boys or girls learn? So what happens, and I should know because it happened to me, they leave school with an aversion to learning.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I totally agree with you there. And as somebody who at my school years, I left at 15. As soon as I could get out of school, that was it. There was no way I was going into any secondary education. And it's only then that I started to learn. And I found learning not a chore. I got into my first job, which was in printing, and you're being told this is a print machine. You're going, wow, look at that. And it prints. Oh, I never knew that. How does that? And you're just inquisitive, and, you're sort of going, wow. And can you, and you're asking a million questions, and they're going, blimey, this bloke's enthusiastic. And, I kept the job, which was great. But not only is the school this rigid, narcissistic system, but unfortunately, the whole environment outside of your house, with the way that the government is running its rules, is bad. And what they're proposing with all these other things is even worse. And so we're all at a bit of a loss. That it's not just the school anymore in which you're being ordered about, but we're getting it from everywhere. With when you simply get into a car, there's all these rules that you've got to abide by, these infringements where nobody's been hurt or harmed, that suddenly you're paying for because you've inadvertently driven into a hashed area on the ground. Or there's so many, you've parked your car slightly off on the yellow line or something, and it's just slightly off there. Oh no, there's a ticket, sorry, that's another infringement. We're in a society that's penalizing us almost for breathing, and not complying with the rules and regulations. How do we get around that?
Well, again, it's back to being the individual sovereign. A lot of people say, oh, I need more people to show me the way, and I need more people. Well, that's not sovereign thinking. If you get back into your heart and you know who you are and you know the difference between right and wrong, something else that's left out of the curriculum, the difference between right and wrong. So that will guide you through the maze that is the matrix. There's one other thing, in case people are thinking that we've had a sudden deterioration in the standards of schooling. I'm going to flick to, it won't show up obviously on your screen, but I'm going to flick to something that features in my book and it features in my talk, and it's notes, or it's the main headlines from a lecture given, would you believe, in 1918. That's 1918.
Blimey.
This is how long we've known that schooling is a pernicious evil that we need to do something about. So this was from a lecture given at Harvard University by someone called Alexander Ingalls, spelt English, I-N.
We've got a slight hiccup on the signal
The
coming
20th
in.
century.
Sorry, David. There was just can you just do that again? There was a bit of a hiccup on the signal just then.
It says my internet connection is unstable. Okay. That's very interesting that it should become unstable at that point.
At that point.
Right. So this was a lecture from Harvard University that was covered over. It was covered up, I should say, and denied for nearly 100 years. And in this lecture, Alexander Ingalls, spelt English, I-N-G-L-I-S, made the point that the state school agenda is as follows. It's to destroy, there's about 6 points, destroy individuality and create groupthink. He was referring mainly to secondary or senior, as they call it in the States, but I think it's crept down well into primary now. So destroy individuality, create groupthink. That's 1. Dehumanize via conformity and uniformity. That's 2. Separate, divide, and conquer. That's 3. People know your place, basically. Devalue and demoralize. That's 4. Dumb down and make mute, deaf, and blind. And I can go into that in more detail if you want. And create an elite. It's the elite that they create that will basically kick us, give us a kicking, and give the agents something to go by when they're trying to keep us in our place. To that list of 6 agendas, I've added one which your talk yesterday is relevant for, which is social credit system, the schooling model that we created in the West, which was then transported to the East, and the Chinese have only digitized it. We scoff at the Chinese and say, oh, by the grace of God go we. But wait a minute, this school credit system where you go up the system if you are good and go down if you're bad, and you go out if you're really bad. We've had this for 150 years, and it's the schooling model. And it then leaks into professional references and financial credit references. So we've had this for a long time, but we just didn't recognize it because we were too asleep.
Mm.
So
we've been trained by the system, haven't we? That's the thing. We've been trained by the very same system.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't had the mirror to hold up to the system. And CV19 was the gift that keeps on giving, as I call it. It gave us the mirror that we can now use to hold up and get the system to reflect back on itself, so that we can then show the system up for what it is to help other people see it. Yeah. Bear in mind that however noble our cause and however much in truth we are, there will always be a percentage of the population who say thanks for your truth, but no thanks, and they go right back into the system. So if we're being realistic, schools will keep going because a certain proportion of the boys, girls, and parents cannot face the truth.
Yeah. No, I absolutely understand, and I'm with you there. This has been a really interesting conversation. I don't want this to go on too much longer, if that's okay. But can we just round up? Because I think what's really important is the fact that we talk about that period in which we've gone through the pandemic as for some people it's been very cathartic in a way that it has suddenly made them look elsewhere. People were locked down, they were being told stuff by the mainstream media, but because they perhaps weren't working, they started to look elsewhere for information, for a story that was being told to them which didn't necessarily ring true. Parents, of course, were suddenly having to deal with children that weren't at school. And for a lot of people, it's been an eye-opener. For other people, it was hell on earth, with the family unable to get out and do things. But it sounds to me very much what you're saying. This has been a tipping point in which we can take the best parts of this, and because it effectively is focus. It's like a magnifying glass, focusing on a number of issues that we can now explode, like the education system and like our sovereignty and things like that. That's basically what I think you're saying?
Yeah, it is. Basically, CV19, well, I always say the alleged virus and the alleged pandemic. And if someone is insistent on calling it the virus and it the pandemic, I switch off, because they don't get it. That's my approach.
Putting that aside, putting that aside, I mean, this, whatever it was, is kind of irrelevant. We've gone through that, and I mean, I think that a lot of people have woken up on the back of that may not have been the intention when it was put forward. If we accept that it could possibly be a plandemic, I don't think the people who planned it thought that actually more people would wake up as a result of it. It seems to have been that, you know, there's this element of hope that is growing and growing as people are going, wow, look at this. People are talking in a way that they've never spoken before. They're breaking the system. The dam has got cracks in it, that sort of thing.
Well, what I say is that whatever happened and whatever it means, it took away the fence that we were sitting on. Many people were sitting on.
Yes.
There is no fence now. In fact, I know someone that had a dream recently. I think this is quite a prominent. Anyway, I won't waste everyone's time by pondering who it was, but they had a dream in which some superior being that they actually call God, but let's say someone in their dream was tearing down the fence, and all the people falling off the fence fell either one way or the other. So it's time to make your mind up, folks.
Yeah.
You know, are you pro globalist agenda, or are you pro-humanity? That's the choice, and there is no halfway measure. None.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right there, David. I think that's it. And I hear this: it's the people, or humanity, or the globalists. And the fence is no longer there. There's nothing to stand on. You've got to make that decision. And you've got tools, which is on your website. Could you tell us where we find that?
Yes, the website is thepeopleslawyeruk.com.
Right. I will leave a link anyway in the description, but thepeopleslawyeruk.com.
That confuses people because they expect .co.uk. No, but it's actually because there is an American that calls themselves the People's Lawyer. So I had to add on a UK to the People's Lawyer. So it's the People's Lawyer UK and then .com.
.com.
So there's lots of videos. So for people who haven't got the funds to make an investment but would like to know more, there's dozens and dozens of videos to watch. There's documents and materials to download and use. For those who do want to consolidate their learning, give themselves increased confidence, you can sign up for a course and either simply purchase the materials or pay extra and sign up for live Q&A sessions as well.
That is brilliant. That is really.
There's a link to the book. The book, you can go on Amazon. I know people in the freedom movement don't like the idea, so I've catered for the sovereign free thinkers so that they can buy the book directly off me. What book? Well, the book is School No Place for Children, and there's a link to a Stripe payment on the website itself. Also, there's an events page that details where I'm going to be live on location. And my slug line is on tour till we win the war. Like it.
On tour until we win the war. David, thank you so much for talking to us and giving us that insight into your philosophy and the tools and all of that. I think a lot of people will be looking at this with their eyes and their jaws opening and going, blimey, we have a chance. There is things that we can do. Because I know from my emails that I get constantly, there's a lot of people who are fearful, and there are a lot of people in the comments who sort of just are effectively acquiescing what's happening and just going, oh, there's nothing we can do. We've just got to accept it. It's all too late. And I keep saying, it's not.
Can I step in there? Because
please do.
Fear is an acronym: false evidence appearing real.
False evidence appearing real, yeah.
Yeah, there is actually no emotion known as fear. It's false evidence appearing real. Also, the other thing to point out is that the dark cannot affect the light. It's the light can only affect the dark. You can't make light go dark, but you can make light deny its own light.
Interesting, yes.
So the minute we open out to our light within, and this is why everything goes back to the schooling process. The schooling process is an exercise in making light beings believe that they are dark, or that there is only dark, and giving people who are already quite dark before they even enter the school classroom, giving them basically a free run. They become the prefects, the teacher's pet, and they go on to be teachers themselves. So what we need to be is conscious of the light within us. And I don't want to take this too far down the woo-woo sort of mystical feel. I want to give people some real tangible thoughts that remember, nobody was able to inject you, but they were able to convince you to go and get an injection.
Yes.
Just bear that one in mind. Nobody, even within the freedom movement, you have people saying, oh, they're going to come with the jabs and knock on our door and knock the door in. That's not going to happen. They cannot, because they believe in karma. These dark forces believe in karma, law of consequences. And they're not allowed to impede on our free will choices. But they are allowed to make us make the wrong choices.
Yes, and then it becomes our choice.
That as long as it's our choice, the fact that it's a wrong choice gives them no karma.
Right. Yeah. So that is something to take away, because a lot of people think, oh my goodness, there's going to be an army of people. They'll be bashing the door down. They'll pin you on the table and just inject you.
No, it's not going to happen. Right. It's not going to. If it was going to happen, it would have happened
years
by
ago.
now already. It's not going to happen. There's only a few thousand of them. There's millions of us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So. Please, everyone, please be reassured that you are the alpha and omega in your life. Nobody can force you. They can remember that the ultimate enemy of the light is the deceiver. The deceiver. The deceiver can only deceive. The deceiver cannot do anything as such, except make you go wrong, make you lose all track of who you are and lose your common sense, etc., etc. That's why it's so wrong to be in a classroom for as long as we are in the classroom. It's just wrong. And so that's the key. Some people actually say that we have already won.
Well, I hope so. I hope so, David.
And all that's happening is that some residual battles are just taking place.
Yes.
To help wake more people up. Yes.
Well, it's certainly waking people up. You can see that because there's so much that people are being thrust with. What this and now this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to, and in the end, you know, it's not softly, carefully implement these things. It's so in your face that people are being forced to sort of go, hang on a minute, this is not right. So I can absolutely accept that. That's really pretty self-evident, isn't it now? There's just too much that people are going, no, don't want this. And I have heard from other sources people saying we've already won, but it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors now and deception and the last throes of, which let's hope that's true. David, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. I do hope that our paths will cross in real life, and I'll come along to one of your talks where you are. That would be fantastic.
Well, you're bound to have a talk near you sometime soonish. Where are you based, Richard?
I'm down in Sussex, down on the south coast, near Worthing Way.
I'm at Eastbourne. In a week on Friday. Is it Friday today? Yeah. So it's next week, a week today, Friday 31st.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm probably... My diary is so full, I'm probably sitting here doing another interview with somebody else. But I'm
It will
sure...
be the evening. It will be the evening, though.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Eastbourne in the evening next Friday. I'll see what I'm up to. David, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do check out David's website, thepeopleslawyeruk.com. Check out his book. Check out the courses. Thank you very much for watching. David, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'll be back with more of these interviews. Until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.